I'm Melna. I think my name is on the screen now. I am president of our chapter for 2020. And just welcome to our May session. I know that a whole lot of you are becoming pros at Zooming. I'm not one of those people. I'm trying this out for the first time, so there may be some snafus, but don't tell me. Tell me later, okay? I'm going to give you a few tips for today and a little bit of information. Our session today is going to be recorded, okay? If that's not something that you want, then you can turn off your video. But we're going to be recording the session today. We are trying to record more of our sessions and make them available to our membership. We aren't quite there yet. We're getting there. Slow process. Right now, I think well, I don't know what you're looking at it as. I'm looking at this in speaker view, but you have a choice. You can choose gallery view or speaker view, and there's a little box up in the right-hand corner of your screen that allows you to change it from speaker to gallery view, okay? Question? There was a question? No? We're gonna put we ask everyone to be on mute because of background noise and that you may not be aware of that may be coming through your speaker. So we ask everyone to be on mute. And if it does happen, I might put you on mute, or Kathy might actually put you on mute, okay? We are going to be using the chat box for the most part today for our questions, to pose questions, to put comments in, or to address anything else. Use the chat box. Doesn't mean that you can't speak verbally. If you actually really want to say what you have to say, that's okay too. We are just going to try to keep things moving a little more. This is going to be an interactive session though. David has some questions and some things that he's going to be talking with you about or asking you about. So you'll have the opportunity to weigh in or to ask questions. What else? We're going to presume that everyone here has positive intent as we go through this session today, okay? We are going to also enact confidentiality. So the cone of silence has now been lowered. If you ever watched Star Trek, I'm a Trekkie. And so we are going to have confidentiality in the discussions that take place here today. So we ask that what is said here is not shared by name without permission of that individual, okay? And let's see, the last thing is you probably want to just take 10 seconds when you are about to respond or give an answer or ask a question to give it thought, because it takes about that much time to unmute yourself and then speak. So just slow down a little bit. It's not quite like having a face-to-face conversation, as probably you've already experienced if you've been doing a lot of these virtual meetings. Okay, Kathy, we'll record now. So it's great to have you all here today. We at ICF Sacramento have a passion for professional coaches, and we have made it our mission to inspire and to empower you and others as well, whether that be your community, your clients, your neighbors, or even your family. It is our passion to connect coaches to one another, to connect you to training, to contribute training and resources and any kind of opportunity and experiences that we could bring about. In that way, we as coaches all thrive. So our Lunch and Learn sessions kind of grew out of that passion about 1.5 years ago. I see some returning faces that were there when we were meeting face to face, and we've gone virtual with this. I think this is now the 3rd virtual Lunch and Learn that we're hosting. The intention is to gather together still, it hasn't changed, in a safe space, in a creative space, and then share whatever successes we might have had as coaches, the challenges that we are experiencing, the how-tos, how did you get there, how did you do that, where did you find it, and the whys of why we do what we do. So this is going to be considered, under the cone, the safe space to do that sort of thing, okay? So welcome to our May Lunch and Learn. And today we have with us David Cory. He is our speaker, and he's going to be leading our conversation around emotionally intelligent coaching. This will award 1 CCEU to those who are here from beginning to end. And the way we are kind of doing that or figuring it out is we're using the chat box, and we're asking for participants to kind of sign in at the beginning and again at the end. And so I'll tell you when to do that, okay? But during the discussion, David's going to share with us what defines emotional intelligence, why it matters for coaching and for us as professional coaches. And he's going to share with us one of the world's leading models for emotional intelligence. And then the 5 keys for developing emotional intelligence competencies. Okay? That's a lot to swallow. But before we get started, I'm going to ask everyone to share with one another using the chat box. I'd like you to tell us who you are, where you're at, what your business is, if you'd like to share that, and what your one hope for today is, what hope you have for today. Just enter it in the chat box. Don't hit the enter key just yet, okay? Enter it in there. Got it? All right, hit enter. It's great. Oh, and Tina shared that a shortcut to unmuting yourself is to press and hold the space bar. And when you let it go, you go back on mute. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, everyone. We got people from everywhere doing everything, all kinds of coaching. This is great. So David is going to be hosting and leading us in conversation from about 11:45 till about 1. And I don't know if any of you will have to break off at 1 o'clock, but if not, stick around. David, take it away.
Thanks so much, Melna. It's great to be here. It's great to see all of you. And it's also fun to have a small group so we can have lots of discussion and lots of interaction with each other. Now, I'm pretty sure all of you have heard of emotional intelligence, but how many of you have read at least one book on emotional intelligence? How about 2 books on emotional intelligence? How about 3 books on emotional intelligence? Okay, so how many of you have been certified to use one of the many emotional intelligence tools out there in your coaching business? Okay, a few of you. And so Melna, could I ask which one that you're certified to use? Tina, how about you?
You can tell how often I use it, right?
Oh, Tina, you're gonna have to unmute yourself.
I was trying to use my spacebar trick and apparently it didn't work. It's not 100%. Talent Smart, but I haven't really used it.
Okay, okay. And Michelle?
Learning in Action.
Okay, great. Yeah, yeah. Ron Short and Jan Johnson. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So, so what is your definition of emotional intelligence? So you're sitting around a table at a restaurant, and conversation turns to someone says, I met someone the other day, and they had no emotional intelligence, and someone else says, "What's emotional intelligence? What do you say? What's your kind of coach's definition of emotional intelligence at this point?" Yeah, feel free to type in. Oh, does the Hogan assessment count as an EQ tool? It's interesting that there are many, many tools out there that kind of, in a way, come up against the concept of emotional intelligence, and certainly you could use it. to talk about someone's emotional intelligence. Absolutely. Okay, someone's read lots of articles on emotional intelligence. Okay, great. Ability to recognize emotions in self and others and regulate emotions. Absolutely. Put yourself in the shoes of someone else. Yeah. Understand the impact of one's words and actions. Absolutely. Ability to do it, to adapt to your environment. Yeah, brilliant. Ability to recognize, manage your own emotions, recognize social cues, and manage relationships effectively. Yeah, it's kind of like all of the above. And when someone asks me, my simple, quick little definition is it's about being intelligent about emotions. And it's usually not satisfactory for a lot of folks. They want to know, okay, come on, there must be more to it than that. It's not as simple as just being intelligent about emotions. And of course, there are many models, and we're going to look at one today, which I think is the leading model, and I'll tell you why. Empathy, social awareness, build on self-awareness and self-regulation skills. I'm kind of reading the chat box as well as talking to you, but absolutely, these are all wonderful parts of emotional intelligence. And I guess, if you look at all the leading models out there, they kind of fall into two categories. One category, and this is the category of the guys who actually get credit for coining the term emotional intelligence. Their view of emotional intelligence is more of our innate capacity that is genetically predetermined. And actually, their intention when they originally formulated their theoretical concept was that it doesn't change. So you have what you have in terms of your emotional intelligence. And they're kind of mad at Daniel Goleman for suggesting that you can improve your emotional intelligence, because that wasn't their intention. And those guys are Jack Mayer and Peter Salovey. The Mayer-Salovey model of emotional intelligence is about how the brain processes emotions and emotional information. And really, that was their intent, that you've got what you've got, and then you kind of learn to live with what you've got. They have an assessment tool that goes along with their model. It's called the Mayer-Salovey, and they brought in their colleague David Caruso into the creation of what is affectionately referred to as the Mesquite, the Mayer-Salovey-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test. And it's quite psychological in nature, and it really tries to get at and understand your brain's ability to process emotions and emotional information. That's one of the leading models out there. And so with that assessment tool and that approach to emotional intelligence, what we're largely doing is we're helping people to understand more about what their brain's capacity is, and then we're learning to work with that, much like you work with an IQ test. So IQ tests, as you know, these are not that likely to change over the course of your life from early adulthood. And it really helps to understand what types of information your brain processes and how it processes. And then once you know what your strengths are, you can leverage those strengths. And what your weaker areas are, you can build in strategies and tactics to try to compensate for those weaker areas. And that's the Mayer-Salovey approach. Most other approaches to the study of emotional intelligence or to the theoretical conceptualization of it include skills and competencies. So we're looking at, in effect, if you want to think about emotional intelligence as part nature, part nurture, the Mayer-Salovey model is more the nature part, that is what is genetically predetermined, and most other models fall into the nurture part. What have you learned by way of knowing and understanding your own emotions, knowing and understanding the emotions of others, knowing and understanding the emotions that come from certain situations and circumstances, and understanding how, and a lot of models miss this one out, knowing and understanding how emotions influence cognition. So the processing of rationality, logic, reason. And the model that I'll show you actually includes that, and is quite a comprehensive model in terms of understanding how emotions are involved in our behavior and in our lives. So I have a little PowerPoint presentation for you, which I'm going to show you. I'm just checking the chat box again to see what else we've got here. Empathy, social awareness, versatility in adapting to others' emotions and behavior. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting kind of synonyms out there with respect to emotional intelligence. We sometimes use the term maturity to describe someone who possesses emotional intelligence competencies. We sometimes call what people have as resilience. They seem to be able to bounce back or come back after a setback. And there are many other concepts and ideas that you probably use in your coaching that are highly related to emotional intelligence. And when people ask about those and the relation to emotional intelligence, and people say, well, what about the resilience quotient or the adversity quotient or these other quotients out there? And the answer is that those may be a part of what we're talking about. But the concept of emotional intelligence is intended to be kind of an umbrella concept. It's a field of study. There is the Center for the Study of Emotional Intelligence at Yale University. And this is really about the scientific understanding of emotions. Whereas many other of those concepts and many of the other of those areas are not actually a field of study. You wouldn't find a team of PhDs sort of focusing in that area necessarily at a post-secondary institution, but you do with respect to emotional intelligence. And of course, we use the terms EI and EQ interchangeably, but technically speaking, EQ is a measure of how well or how poorly you use the emotional intelligence that you have. And again, most of the models out there are about models of skills and competencies. So we'll look at those. And I'm just gonna share my screen with you now. And we'll begin here. Okay, so if you have a question at any time, please type it in the chat box, or feel free to just unmute yourself and speak up and jump right in. Again, you know, we want this to be more interactive, and so I'm going to throw some ideas out there, and I want your feedback, and I want your reaction as well to that. Just finding the chat box. Okay, I've got that up here. And isn't it interesting in this day of these times of COVID with everything being online? I'm also staffing a virtual booth at a virtual conference today. So these little messages are popping up on my computer screen, but you've got my full attention here. Great, Colleen wrote great books, anything by Goleman. Yes, yeah, his initial book, which was simply called Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ, came out in 1995 and really has popularized the concept of emotional intelligence worldwide. All right, so this, hopefully you can see on your screen the slide where we've got this image of a human head with the brain there, and we've got logic at the front and emotion in another part of the brain.
Your slide did not advance.
Oh, it didn't.
Yes.
Oh,
So you need to advance your slide.
Okay.
David, I think you might need to be in slideshow mode.
Okay, I'm gonna reshare. And can you see it now?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, great. So yeah, I did want to address a chat. Okay, so we've got a comment from Tina, questioning the assertion that our EQ doesn't really change. Yeah, I didn't say that. Actually, what Mayer and Salovey talk about the fact that our capacity for being intelligent around emotions doesn't really change. So that's what they're saying. And they, in fact, they don't even call their measure in terms of using the mesquite to measure emotional intelligence. They can't even call that EQ, because that was already taken by the guy who created the framework that I'm going to share with you. So they had to use EIQ. That's what they measure, is your emotional intelligence quotient, which doesn't change all that much like IQ. The Talent Smart training was around the idea that you can improve EQ. Yes, absolutely, because the Talent Smart model is the Goleman model, which is about skills and competencies. Terrific book, The Resonant Leader by Richard Boyatzis and Nanny McKee. Absolutely, Colleen. Thank you for sharing that one. Yes. Okay. So this image is really important, and the importance of it, and the shocking thing for a lot of people who attend our workshops and our courses, is they walk away realizing that emotion is involved in everything. And this fact that our brains process emotions and emotional information at the same time as logic and rationality, it means that there's always emotions. So contrary to the popular belief, or the traditional belief rather, that you can leave emotion out of it, and that you need to somehow subvert emotions at certain times. Well, that may be true, that you need to perhaps regulate emotions at certain times, but really the idea that you can leave emotions out of a decision is not actually physiologically possible. So here it is. There's ultimately probably one intelligence, and it happens to be emotional. That we view everything through an emotional lens, every perception. In fact, the first perception that in the brain's processing system is whether something is a threat to us or not a threat to us. And you probably know this, and you use this with your coaching clients. But really, it is what determines whether, when we walk into a room full of people that we don't know, it determines whether we stay or whether we go. And we process that in a nanosecond. And it is the holy grail of artificial intelligence, is looking at how can we actually create an emotional response in a machine, which they haven't been able to do yet because there are so many inputs, and they don't have the computing power. And the answer probably lies in quantum computing in terms of creating artificial emotional intelligence, but it is the kind of the holy grail of artificial intelligence. So yeah, questions, comments, feel free to type in the chat box, or simply take your mic off mute. If you know about some of this work, I'm fascinated by artificial intelligence work, and some really cool companies that come out of the valley on the other side of the bay from where you are, or where most of you are. These are fascinating, and of course there are lots of commercial sort of purposes for artificial intelligence, and people sometimes say, well, why would you want to create a machine that had an emotional response? And that's an interesting question. But so how do we create an emotional response? Well, as you know, emotions are biochemical reactions to stimuli in our environment, and so we take in through our five senses, our perceptions of our environment, and our emotions provide us with data, and that data tells us more about our environment. And if we grow up or come from a belief system which devalues emotions, which says you shouldn't be paying so much attention to your emotions, or emotions should be avoided and denied, which I think in a kind of a general sense, I think that's the teachings of society. Then you may not pay attention to your emotions. Another comment, Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Travis Bradbury and Gene Greaves, learned it takes 6 seconds for stimulus to travel from amygdala to rational brain. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, that 6 seconds idea was adopted by, you may know of the organization 6 Seconds, run by my friend and colleague Josh Friedman. And 6 Seconds is one of the largest organizations that teaches and certifies people with respect to emotional intelligence in the world. yeah, there's a lot of fascinating research on the brain and a lot of fascinating findings that help us to understand more about emotional intelligence. So, okay, so what is a model? Well, here's a model that was created by Dr. Reuven Bar-On in the 80s. It was first published as an assessment tool by a Canadian publishing company called Multi-Health Systems in 1997. And it was updated radically in 2011 to give us the present day model, which we sometimes refer to as the EQI 2.0 model of emotional intelligence. So at the center of the model, so did that slide advanced? Yes, I'm just assuming that you're looking at the wheel model of emotional intelligence right now.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
it did
great.
advance.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so this model has the concept of emotional intelligence at the center, the fact that our brains process emotions and emotional information at the same time as all of the other information processing that our brains do, and then from that we've got various skills and competencies, all of which are emotional skills and competencies. So, for example, how you perceive yourself is a competency. And it's interesting because at first it's like, well, how can that be a competency? Well, there are ways that we perceive ourselves, as you know, or regard ourselves to be more specific, that are supportive of our achieving our goals and our objectives in our lives and in our work. And there are ways of regarding ourselves that actually don't support us as well. So you can regard yourself well and in a healthy way that supports you and causes you to be more effective. And there are ways that you can regard yourself that actually don't help you out much. And so just a quick little discussion about self-regard or self-perception. How many of you have clients that perhaps struggle with self-regard, that's an issue for them? They don't feel as confident as they want to feel. They don't feel as comfortable in their own skin as they want to feel. They sometimes struggle with imposter syndrome. They may even have big jobs. They may even demonstrate tremendous levels of competency and achievement, and yet somehow there's a disconnect between what's real, what they do, and their belief about themselves. And so that's that self-regard area. And what's interesting, and we'll go back to the model momentarily, but these components of self-perception are kind of woven together in this interesting weave. So we've got, on the one hand, we've got self-regard, so how you regard yourself. This consists of all the beliefs that we have about ourselves that have built up throughout all of the messaging that has come our way over the years, and whether we believe it or whether we've chosen not to believe it. And then, you know, a fascinating thing for us in our coaching work are the people who struggle with self-regard. That is, they rate themselves low on self-regard on the assessment tool, and yet they achieve at very high levels. And for them, it's never enough. And you may have encountered coaching clients like that, for whom it's never enough. It's always the next greatest thing and the next greatest thing. And they think that one of those things is actually going to be it. It's going to be, they're going to, you know, finally have completed their task or their assignment. And but then it's on to the next. And so, you know, for those folks, we really want to ask them about this idea of when is enough, and what about all that pressure and stress they're putting on themselves with that view of themselves and what it is that they do. Which helps us to bring in the concept of self-actualization, which you all learned about in Psychology 101 probably, and Maslow's pyramid. And isn't it interesting that COVID-19 restrictions have even challenged our notion of self-actualization and maybe caused us to rethink or re-examine that hierarchy of needs, and caused us to maybe look, you know, whereas maybe previously many of us were in self-actualization because of we're involved in doing work that we love and is fulfilling and has meaning and purpose for us. But now COVID-19 comes along and we're kind of wondering, how are we going to pay the bills? So we've shifted down to look at more of those safety needs. So that's interesting and fascinating, how situation and circumstances of life have shifted our perspective and shifted what we pay attention to. Okay, just going back to check the comments again in the chat box, and again, please feel free to type in there. I read somewhere it takes 90 seconds for an emotion to process all the way through your body if you don't attach to it. Yeah, that's interesting. And also leads to, you know, the differentiation between mood states and emotions. So, you know, you can think about emotions as your response to a stimuli or stimulus in your environment. And then mood states are kind of those ones that kind of hang around. So those emotions that you kind of attach to use your word there, Tina. And then you get in a mood state, and then to think about how those mood states, which can come and go, but they kind of hang around for a while, how that affects the way that you perceive and think about other matters in your work and in your life. Kim says, have seen many indicators you can develop good habits to move from reaction, the emotional content, to response, add logic by slowing down, apart from the matter of if a person's EQ is fixed or not. Absolutely. So there's lots of tactics and strategies here, and the model that I'm going to show you is a model where we try to measure emotional skills, all of which are improvable through coaching. So that's the importance of the model, and why we think it's such a powerful model. Any work around trauma and EI? Absolutely. There's a lot of work around trauma and EI. A lot of the work that others have done around and introduced the notion of trauma coaching. Interestingly, I have a meeting looking at a trauma coaching certification course after our time together today. This is why the study of mindfulness and self-awareness is so crucial. Absolutely. So mindfulness is the application of some emotional intelligence skills, and it's just being more aware of what's going on with us in terms of our emotional responses and our emotional reactions. Really interested in cultural intelligence and how, from a societal and cultural standpoint, how EI is defined, especially contrasting how people process as individuals or groups. Not sure there's much research on this. Does anyone know? A couple of presentations of mine at some international EQ conferences have been on cultural factors in measuring emotional intelligence. And so, people ask about that all the time. And I like to say that what is emotionally intelligent in one culture may not be emotionally intelligent in another culture. And so we have to be aware of where we are and where we're working, and know that absolutely cultural factors have a role to play. People sometimes ask, what are your observations or conclusions based on all of the work that I've done in different cultures around the world? And my bottom line on that is that we are far more similar than we are different, no matter what culture we come from. And this model that we're reviewing right now has universal applicability. So that's been shown through various research studies. And again, but what's different is, when it comes to being assertive, for example, in one culture, that looks different depending on where you are. And so what anthropologists call display rules, that is how your actual actions may be different, and you will adapt to the culture that you're in. The concept of assertiveness and balancing your needs and the needs of others in your messaging is going to be critical and important no matter where you are. Okay, so Christina is curious how EI can be different between men and women. Excellent question. In fact, we've done several webinars and shows on our YouTube channel about this very fact that there are some empirical differences between men and women. And so to understand that and to think about that is to think about how we're socialized. And what we're socialized to believe is important, and all of this plays into to our EQ. Okay, yes, Lisa Barrett Feldman wrote that wonderful book on emotion, and the title of which I can't remember at the moment, but you probably know it. It's something about the molecules of emotion or something like that. In any case, let's carry on and take a look at our at this model, and I'll tell you more about it. So again, here, this is the model that is the basis of the emotional quotient inventory. It is an online assessment tool, and of course, psychologists like to create models and they like to create measuring tools, and so that's no different for this. So we've got these 5 categories of EQ skills, and then we've got 15 what we call EQ competencies or subscales. And you can see there are words that are not unfamiliar to you. There are things like emotional self-awareness, emotional expression, assertiveness, independence, interpersonal relationships, empathy, social responsibility, problem solving, reality testing, impulse control. That whole area of decision making, by the way, is all about how emotion affects cognition. We'll take a bit of a look at that shortly. And then finally, we've got stress management, because stress is so critical and important in our lives, and we need to know how to manage that. There's a bit of directionality in the model, and if you think about how we develop these skills and competencies in spite of ourselves, you can imagine perhaps an infant who is lying in their crib, and they see these fingers waving over their eyes and wondering what that is. And that's the beginning of our self-perception. Once you realize that those fingers are you and a part of you, then imagine all the messages that get sent to an infant, that they're loved, that they belong, that they're worthy and deserving, and all those things. And then as they grow, and then imagine that same infant now screams and cries. That's the self-expression part. And then things happen for that infant, and someone comes, someone changes them, feeds them, etc. That's the beginning of connection with others, that whole interpersonal realm. And then as we grow and develop, we realize that life is about problem solving and making decisions every moment about what our next move is, and what we're going to do, and where we're going to go, and who we're going to see, and those kinds of things. And then as we get older, it's about managing the stress. The ship wasn't meant to stay in the harbor, so we have to go out from our comfortable home where our parents look after everything for us, and actually make our way out in the world. And then, what is our ability or our capability and our skills to manage the waves and the storms out there on the open seas. All right, so I'll just take another look at the chat box and see how emotions are made, the secret life of the brain. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. Interested in knowing more about the trauma certification course? Sure, I'm happy to share information about that. And I'm just going to learn about it this afternoon, actually. And sounds like this model can change with age or development. Absolutely. So we have data to show that we get more emotionally intelligent as we get older, and we have opportunities to learn and develop these skills and competencies almost in spite of ourselves, as I mentioned. And then depending on the factors that are involved in our socialization growing up, these determine whether we develop these to a greater or lesser extent, because to date, our public school systems are looking at how, in fact, that's the focus of the Yale Center for the Study of Emotional Intelligence, is the public school system, is how can we get these lessons into the younger and younger ages? How can we teach people more about how their emotions operate for themselves? So, so let's take a bit of a deeper dive into this model. Let's take a look at, start with self-perception. As I mentioned, this is about the ability to know yourself. I like this image of this little guy because, I'm thinking about what this little guy might have been told in terms of his parents and preparing him for life in the cruel world, which might actually be critical of his appearance and the way he looks. And he might come home after his first day of school or kindergarten and say to his mom, why do I have to wear my hair so short? Or why do I have to wear this shirt with the buttons and the collar, etc.? And so it's about what we do with those messages that get sent to us. And ultimately, evidence for someone who has a healthy self-perception is they have fairly healthy goals. They are involved in what they love. They are fulfilled, and they come across as self-assured. All right, trying to deal with questions as they come up as well. Sounds like this model can change with age or development. Yes. Do you know if we tend to stay in one part of the model, say in our 20s as opposed to our 40s or 60s? Yeah, no, I don't know about that. But again, that kind of depends on our journey and where our journey takes us and what sorts of life circumstances we have to contend with and that sort of thing, and what support we get. I mean, people who seek out counseling and coaching and personal development, they're going to have more well-developed areas of this model. I show this model. You've all seen this model before. It's the proverbial iceberg, and we human beings are like that. So. And our company is involved mostly with leadership development. So we are having to talk with leaders who have tremendous technical skills that there's all this other stuff going on beneath the surface for themselves and for the teams that they lead. Even in the most technical circumstances, that connection with others actually happens beneath the surface. And so, it's important that we know and understand how we operate beneath the surface. What sorts of stimuli in our environment affect us? What is it that makes us irritated or angry? What sorts of things create joy for us and passion? And so it's important to know and understand how we operate beneath the surface so that we can share that with others. So we're really talking about self-awareness and self-expression. So this whole area of self-expression is about openly and effectively expressing your feelings, wants, needs, and opinions freely. And the evidence is that others get to know you. We have managers who ask us, why do I have to share my emotions? And the reason is that we don't trust what we don't know. And if you want to develop an element of trust on your team and with your people, then it's about opening up and letting people see how you operate beneath the surface, letting people know what you're worried about, what you're afraid of, what your dreams are, what your hopes for the future are, and demonstrating your passion for the work. That we know that this makes, from empirical research, we know this makes the best leaders. Okay, so I am not able to see your faces while we're looking at the PowerPoint, and so I'm relying on the chat box. So if you have comments, please feel free to type in there. If I could maybe just quickly go through the model, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion and take questions at that time. Here's the interpersonal composite area of the model. This is all about having meaningful connections with others. Evidence of a meaningful connection, that is a relationship that there's trust, that there's an element of loyalty, commitment, connection, understanding, and effective teamwork. And of course, our area of expertise is in creating effective organizations. So it's understanding how individuals developing these individual skills affect organizational effectiveness. And certainly we place this within the context of leadership, we place it in the context of team effectiveness, customer service, sales, all of the things that all organizations need. Nonprofits always sit up and say, we don't do sales, when in fact they do. Post-secondary institutions, they're in sales, right? You want students coming to your institution. Nonprofits want funders to fund their organization, etc. So it's about understanding how all that happens, and how all those areas, leadership, team effectiveness, customer service, and sales, which are, by the way, the top so-called soft skills corporate training out there, they're all based on one human being's ability with other human beings, which involves being intelligent about emotions. So there's the interpersonal area, there's the decision, this is the decision-making area. This is the one that some models miss out on. And it is about the understanding that emotions are involved in every decision we make. And so we can't leave emotions out of it. So better to understand the emotions that are there and how they're affecting how we think about things, our perspectives, our beliefs, etc., our assumptions. The evidence is that you come up with excellent solutions, that you consider all options while minimizing unconscious bias. So unconscious bias, as you know, are those beliefs that we have, those little ways that we are drawn through our emotions to various aspects of problem solving that may not necessarily be in our best interest. Well, they certainly bias us. As you know, we're all biased. And so it's about understanding and knowing more about that bias so that we can minimize unconscious bias. And lastly, the sort of minimizing the negative impact on others and unnecessary delays. So things like procrastination are purely emotional. They have nothing to do with your technical skill to solve a problem, but everything to do with your emotions. So it's important to understand the role that emotions have in the way that you personally solve problems. And then again, we can turn around and help our coaching clients. The area of stress management, we use the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which was created in 1908, the stress performance curve. You may have seen this before as well, in order to help people to understand more about how they manage stress. And what you know is that in circumstances with too little stress, I think we all want this, we don't do much. And then there's that optimal level, where we can be involved in what has meaning and a sense of purpose for us. And then finally, if we keep trying to take on too much, we get into that too much stress or overload area and leading to burnout. This is a sample of one of the pages from a highly detailed EQI report. And this individual was an executive that I was working with. He seemed to struggle with expressing too much emotion. So you might think higher is better. And in this particular case, this individual had a very high score in emotional expression at 121. The mean is 100, standard deviation is 15. So his score at 121 on emotional expression, very high. His score on impulse control is only 72, that area of the model which would help someone to regulate and manage their emotional expression was very low. And so he was inappropriately expressing emotion in the workplace, led to inappropriate relationships in the workplace, and he was ultimately terminated from his position, unfortunately. We were making some headway, and he was really beginning to understand this, but the decision to terminate was out of my hands. Doesn't emotional expression vary by culture? Absolutely, Gail, it does vary by culture. In fact, I've done work in Nigeria, and so those of you who may have done work in Nigeria might know that they're very passionate people. And I was asked by I was interviewed by a newspaper when I was in Lagos, and they asked me about Nigerians' emotional intelligence, and I had to say they were very passionate people, but the reality was where I happened to go in Lagos, there were a lot of lack of impulse control, let's say, with respect to emotional expression, and people, were involved in passionate debates. In fact, I almost had a fist fight in my classroom, and I had to say that I was taking a break and march out in order to avoid that. In any case, absolutely. And we know that some other cultures, it's very difficult to tell how people are feeling. And that, again, is based on a cultural belief that we don't, that showing emotions is a sign of weakness, and being vulnerable opens us up to harm from others. And of course, you all know what Brene Brown says about vulnerability, and her concepts of courage, and we encourage people to choose courage over comfort. So comfort is remaining unknown, not expressing emotions, not being vulnerable, and we try to encourage people to understand more about the courage, the willingness to face the uncertainty of sharing emotions and putting it out there, and seeing the incredible risk-reward equation in action. So the greater the risk, the greater the potential reward in relationship with others. Okay,
Hey,
so
can I ask a
please,
question?
absolutely, yes.
Because this brings up something that I've always wondered about. And so if you have an assessment that measures what levels of expressions are appropriate for a given.
It doesn't do that, Gail. So it's an inventory. We have to tell people it's not a test. We're not testing your EQ as much as we're taking an inventory of your skills. So you use the word appropriate, and again, that's a really difficult thing to know.
Exactly.
That depends. That it kind of goes to the results that you're getting, right?
Yeah.
So we really focus. We teach people how to use the EQI in our certification courses, and we teach people that the most important part here is the coaching conversation that you're going to have with your client based on those EQI scores. So as to whether it's appropriate or not, yeah, it depends on what you're trying to do, right? What are your objectives? What are you trying to do in your work or in your life? As to whether how you apply these skills actually turns out to be appropriate.
So the reason I asked is because as an African-American woman, and I came up in the corporate world, and I found that the level of expression was very low. Facial expression, very low from my perspective, right? From my culture perspective. And again, mine from a white dominant perspective was high, right? And so I wonder about coaching people around what's appropriate and what perspective we coach them from, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really critical and important part of using your EQ. Is where are you using it, and what is going to be effective in any given situation. So the scale, the model, sort of gives us the sort of the comprehensive understanding of the various tools that will be used, and it is unlikely that you're just going to use one of those tools. You're going to actually use these tools in concert with each other, and you're going to find the right balance for a given situation. So, you know, your emotional expression in some situations and circumstances may have been taken as too much. So, and you may have, you know, gotten the comment, wow, that Gail, she's so emotional. And it wasn't a compliment. And that's because we don't, again, in our societies, in many of our dominant societies, value those expressions of emotion. And so we have a long way to go in our evolution as a species to get to the point where everyone's emotional expression is welcome.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah. Yeah. What other questions come up for you when you think about what we've been talking about and what I've presented to you so far? I'm going to take a look at the chat box now, but please, if you want to unmute yourself and jump in. Oh, thanks, Karen, for yeah, Yerkes Dodson did the stress chart. So Casey says, here's where I see my clients getting conflicting information. For instance, we talk a lot about being vulnerable, The message seems to be the more vulnerable, the better. Actually, that's not necessarily the message, right? So if that's all you get is a snippet of that suggestion, then it's incomplete. And we have to use these competencies in combination with each other. You don't want to use assertiveness without empathy, because then you're not actually watching how it's affecting others while you are saying what it is that you need, what it is that you want. If you're drawing a boundary, those kinds, you have to be watching for how it's affecting others at the same time. Message seems to be the more
I appreciate that, David. I just wanted to add a clarification. When I said that, what I meant to say is that it's the prevailing message, I think, not the message from your talk that you're giving today, but it seems to me that we talk a lot about vulnerability today, which I think it is important. We don't talk a lot about the limits of vulnerability, at least from what I hear and some of the talks that I see. We talk about how important it is to be vulnerable. And so with my clients, I see that because there's such emphasis on it, you need to be vulnerable, that we often don't set any kind of threshold, however blurry the line between too much vulnerability and enough vulnerability might be.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it all goes back to, first of all, where are you on the vulnerability spectrum? And then where do you need to go? So again, that whole gap analysis idea, what's current state, what's future desired state, and how are we gonna fill in the gap through our development efforts? And understanding that people don't transform, right? It's not like you're not vulnerable with anyone and then you're vulnerable with everyone. It's, where's that safe practice place? Where can you actually start to be a bit vulnerable? And that's why I like the iceberg diagram, because it's like, okay, so let's just go a little bit beneath the surface. What's a little bit beneath the surface? And then let's go deeper, and then let's go a bit deeper. And so we've got lots of wonderful interactive exercises and ways of teaching people how to do this in a sort of a gentle, a bit challenging way that pushes people out of their comfort zone and gets them experiencing what it's like to be out of that comfort zone and into a place that's a little bit unfamiliar, but actually at the end of the day feels pretty good because of the reward that comes from that. Thanks, Casey. Okay. Tina says, strengths model, these are strengths, often we had times we overused, our talent shows up as weakness. Absolutely. So there is an assumption when people first see this model that higher is better. So, okay, so let's just get the highest score we can. And absolutely, it's not the way to go. We would much rather see that these things are all in balance with each other. And I caution people who think that they're going to do a pre and post test. They're going to give everybody the EQI. They're going to run them through a coaching program, measure at the end, and see everything go up. Well, that doesn't actually tend to happen. What tends to happen is we see a bit of a right sizing. So you saw all the bars on the page. What we see is some people choose to bring their assertiveness down and their empathy up to come into better balance with each other. So they are more effective in their communication with others. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes we see a spike and we have to ask, what is the downside of that? So, you all, without taking the training course, you all know what the downside of having too high optimism and too low reality testing might be. That's an easy one. And it's like sometimes when people are confronted by it, it's like, oh yeah, that is what I do. And I need to, make sure that while optimism is inspiring to others and it lifts the mood and it's great for the spirits of the people that are around me and people that report to me, I also have to make sure that I'm doing my reality testing. That I, while I see that there's only great things, I need to ask, what are the potential risks here? What do we need to think about moving forward so we make sure that this initiative is successful? Those kinds of things. Okay, is the EI perspective on an approach to boundaries? So did I answer that when I talked about assertiveness? I think I did. So in coaching relationship, wouldn't the client guide the conversation of what is not working for them? Absolutely. So we do want this to be a client-led process in reviewing EQI results, and we're there to sort of guide them through that. And so we have a process, we have a methodology, if you will, that allows for a lot of flexibility when it comes to the client being involved or the coach leading the process, and we really want it to be a coaching process with and client centered. Coach, several women of color expressed a fear, worry about expressing frustration because they don't want to be labeled an angry Black woman. Absolutely, and I have too, Tina,
That was in relation to what Gail was sharing earlier.
Yeah. Never had to worry about being seen as an angry white woman. Absolutely. Yeah. You're talking about some, some cultural mores that are out there, and we have to challenge those beliefs. We have to, if you ever hear someone making a comment about that, we have to reframe that, right? We have to turn that around, we have to. That's going to take time. That's not necessarily something easily fixed, of course. Brene Brown does talk quite a bit about boundaries. She says, yeah, I like when she says that some of the most generous and loving people are also the most boundaried. I love that. If there's no risk, there's no vulnerability. Absolutely, yeah. Not an all or nothing choice of being vulnerable. Yes. Thanks, Donna. Looking at Brene Brown a bit more. Oh yeah, we highly recommend her books to everyone that we work with. She's got wonderful things to say. Well, awesome to see our coaches engaged in important topics like emotional intelligence. Thank you for the resources. All right, bye, Casey. Happy, anger. Yeah, someone's not happy. Yeah, equals angry for Black women. Absolutely. Sometimes have challenges around being too emotional, being moved to tears too easily, being too empathetic. Is there a way to learn to somehow dial back the internal experience? Yeah, great question, Karen. I would really want to know more about that, what you think is too emotional. And isn't it interesting if you're in a group and someone is expressing some emotions and they end up crying, they will apologize, right? It's
Yes.
like, I just had it this morning on a group call. This young woman was speaking passionately about something and she cried and she apologized. It's like, hey, we don't apologize for emotions here. They're just emotions. But we're not there yet as a culture. We don't necessarily embrace all emotions, and we're not necessarily comfortable with all emotions. We have to get there first. And so really the question the question, Karen, is why is that too emotional? Is it too emotional for the person that you're with? I mean,
Usually.
yeah, that could be it, right?
Yeah.
And then being too empathetic. Well, you can be to any of these 15 competencies that we talked about, and if you're over focused on the emotions of others and over invested in them, then that could be an issue. And so again, we want to find that balance. How can you pay attention to the emotions of others and pay attention to other things, like maybe the business case in an organizational decision, for example? And we're frequently dealing with that with various managers because they care so much about the people. They're worried about making a decision that may be in the best interest of the organization. So we have to look at everything on balance. And how can we bring things into better balance? And sometimes that's just with a particular person in a particular relationship, and other times it may be in a more general way. And what we're trying to understand with the EQI is we're trying to understand more about your baseline on some of these skills and competencies, to understand more about how that baseline affects you in your work and in your life.
I wanted to share just one of the very basic things that I've found is very helpful with a lot of my clients is just figuring out their own pause button. And that's kind of that difference between the emotional brain and the logical brain. And I liked the 90-second example that was given, but just having someone visualize their own pause button, whatever that is for them, gives them just a way to rein it in for a minute, to allow them not to attach to one of those areas that doesn't work for them, and have that mindfulness. A lot of people just don't seem to, they think mindfulness is sort of a little hokey or whatever. So that's just one of the things I've used with some of my clients that's been really helpful.
Yeah, and Colleen, some people think that it's about trying not to have that same level of emotional response in future when something happens, and that's actually not it, right? You can have your response, you can have your emotion, but you don't have to operate from that emotion. So I think that's what I like about your 90-second idea, is that it's like, okay, so I've been flooded with whatever, anger, frustration, irritation, whatever that is. And then it's about, okay, so now how do I want to behave as a result? What do I want to do moving forward? And that's what that 90 seconds can help do. And that's impulse control in the model that we were looking at. Discerning your own pause button. Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Gail. All right. What else can I tell you about? What else would you like to know? What else are you curious about with respect? When I think about coaching and emotional intelligence, I think about I think about all aspects. So for coaches, it's about everything from how do you feel about asking for the business? How do you feel about going out and networking and telling people that you're a coach and what you do, and how does that affect what you do there? And how do you feel about marketing, and how do you feel about business development, and all these aspects of coaching that really, when you do your coach training, there's so little spent traditionally on the aspects of business building, and so much focused on the coaching skills, which is great. We need those great coaching skills. But then all of a sudden it's like, okay, so now I'm supposed to make a living from this, and how does all that happen? And there's some great resources, of course, for that as well. But we don't necessarily, screen people who come into coach training based on their entrepreneurial competency, and maybe we should. Maybe that's a piece of it. You're nodding, Gail.
Yeah, that's a piece. It's a big piece of it.
Yeah, it is. And we don't teach entrepreneurial skills in school, right? It's like how is COVID-19 going to affect the future of the world? I think we've got to learn how to do business differently. We've got to really learn how to use all of this wonderful technology in ways that help us to, again, and it's really why they've been kind of down on the term social distancing. Say it's actually not the social distancing, it's the physical distancing, right?
Yes.
That's the important thing, is to maintain that physical distance. But socially, no, let's not distance. Let's get closer. How can we use these platforms? How can we, I'm limited to my facial expression and my tone of voice here. So I got to leverage that, right? I can't come and talk to you about emotional intelligence like this. That just wouldn't work. You'd be bored. It would be, you'd probably come to the conclusion that I didn't care much about it. And so I have to actually leverage that. So how do we leverage what's available to us? So again, that we can connect emotionally, right? It makes me smile when people talk about things like the one thing that makes me smile is it's a mental challenge. Well, it's actually not a mental challenge; it's an emotional challenge. If you think about that word, and there's this course, mental toughness. Well, it's not mental toughness; it's actually emotional toughness. right? It's like, how can we be in that place with our emotions? And you think about an Olympic performance, and why do some people medal on that particular day of that Olympic event, and why do others not? And it's like, well, the stars have aligned for that person who won the gold medal. Mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, all of this kind of the aspects of a person. But really, if they're not there emotionally, if there's nerves or if there's any kind of fear or anxiety that is unmanaged, that's going to affect their performance. And it could cost them a gold medal. So it's interesting. I think that, as a society, we're evolving more and more towards getting comfortable with the concept of emotions. And people like Brene Brown help us tremendously by, openly talking about shame and vulnerability and courage, and giving us new language to talk about these things, and challenging people in, we've traditionally thought of business as being all about the technical skills. We promote people into positions of leadership based on their technical skills. And then we expect them to be the kind of leaders that we want. We expect them to include others. We do this exercise in our workshops where we ask people to think about the best leader they ever had, and describe that person, talk about the impact on them. We have people think about the worst leader they ever had, talk about the qualities and behaviors and the impact on them. And people always describe the best leader they ever had as someone who cared about them as a person, someone who included them, someone who shared information with them, someone who was concerned when they were struggling, someone who challenged them beyond what they believed themselves capable of doing. So they stretched into that role, and they grew, and they developed. Nobody ever says my leader was the best leader because they were the most brilliant lawyer, or they were the most brilliant engineer, or they graduated at the top of their class from Harvard. That's not what makes people the best leader. The best leader is the one who impacts on us emotionally in a way that feels good to us, and can create that kind of workplace environment that people want to go to, people do their best work in. So we have to make this connection between individual behavior and organizational effectiveness. And for a lot of people, that's a big gap. That's a big space. So how do we help people to understand more about that? And how do we help people that, our coaching clients, how do we help them to understand that this whole idea of perspective, right? We don't talk enough about the importance of the perspective that our clients have on their lives. And yeah, it's a coaching skill. We were taught this idea of balance, and there are different perspectives, but really when we're locked in a perspective, it's emotional. And so how do you shift out of that? Well, we learn in coach training to, get your client to stand up. You tell them to walk over to the other side of the room. Tell them to, find an object that, that stimulates them and pushes them into a different perspective. And really that's about trying to somehow shift and impact on the emotions. COVID-19 restrictions, how has that shifted the emotions and shifted our perspective? Maybe from I don't know about all of you, but before COVID-19 restrictions, our business was doing better than it's ever been. And then COVID-19 restrictions, all in-person live events are on hold till further notice. And now, our revenue was impacted dramatically. Okay, so again, going back to Maslow's pyramid, we're kind of shifted out of the self-actualization mode into survival mode. What are we going to do? How are we going to survive? And so, to not deal with the emotions of people, to not say, I just want to do a bit of a check-in today before we start our coaching session. So how are you feeling? Let's put it on the table. Let's get it out. Let's, maybe you close your eyes and you go inside for a moment and you encourage your clients to just, what's there? What are all the emotions that are there? emotion researchers tell us that it's almost impossible to feel just one emotion. So you feel a blend. What is the blend? What are all the things that are there? And how can you access that to help you in the perspective? So I'm just going to check the chat box again. I want to make sure that we cover questions. And great talk today. Say more about the tool and the cost, etc. Yeah, thanks, Gail, for that question. You know, we do these presentations, and if we did it and it was really markety, you'd all turn off, right? You'd all turn your cameras off first, and then probably check out at some point. And so we don't do that. So, but you know, my ulterior motive is, of course, I want you to become interested in the tool. I want you to look at considering using the tool in your work. And so the tool costs $60 per person if you're using it in a sort of a general development kind of way. If you're looking at specific leadership development, you're looking at a cost of $90 per person. That's for the leadership report. And then, you know, there's the certification course, which we do online. It's 4 half days, and we do that from 9 to noon Pacific time, so that people across North America can join us at whatever their time zone happens to be. People, you know, include this in their coaching. It adds a lot of value. And again, you know, I didn't really, but the reason that we think that this is, you know, one of the best tools out there is that it's so comprehensive. It sort of covers the gamut of how emotions affect our lives. Another reason, which is kind of interesting, is that some of the biggest and you know, best companies in the world that have looked at everything and considered everything have decided on this tool. So Google, Nike, Amazon, Microsoft, they all use the EQI in their courses. And Google, as you probably know, had this wonderful course which is all about mindfulness meditation called Search Inside Yourself. And it is a very popular course at Google. However, when they're looking at developing more senior level leadership, they actually want to look at what do you actually do in the meeting? What do you actually do in the interaction with your direct report? How do you manage up? How do you deal with more senior concerns? Those kinds of things. And so for that, they've chosen the EQI. I personally have trained the executive coaches. Some of you may know them, the ones who work with the Stanford Graduate School of Business students, and so, you know, these trained the people at Microsoft who run their high potential program in Bellevue, Washington. So you know, this tool is the most research. It was the first scientifically validated assessment for emotional intelligence back in 1997, and many others have followed. It remains the most researched. There are more resources and books specifically about this model than any other out there. So these are some of the reasons that we think it's great. And again, it's not the be all and end all. It's a tool, and again, it's about developing your coaching skills to elevate those to use with a tool which can take you deep fast. So, you know, use the EQI and you're diving right into the core of where people's issues and challenges lay, and wow, that's powerful. And so can I tell you anything else? Takes about 20 minutes.
Yeah, another question. So you mentioned the $60 one is the base one, and then there's $90 for the leadership.
Yep.
And what's the difference between those two?
Good question. And that is that the workplace report puts the EQ results into general workplace language, and the leadership report includes a transformational model of leadership that has 4 dimensions. One of which is authenticity. So that's a great way to address the whole be who you are idea. Don't pretend to be someone else, because, you know, that's going to affect you negatively and impact you negatively ultimately. And then all of the development language in the leadership report is leadership specific. So if someone doesn't see themselves as a leader, doesn't sort of relate with the language of leadership, then you might use the workplace report for that person.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and then there's that.
And is there a
that's the-
volume discount?
There are volume discounts. Yeah, there's a volume discount. And again, you know, we are a training partner of the publishing company, so we do the training, and then afterwards, you purchase directly from the publishing company. So they would let you know more about those volume discounts.
Okay.
And that's the self-report option. So there's a 360 option as well. So in the 360 option, the senior leader does the EQI. They do the self-report portion, and then and it's all, of course, computerized wonderfully. So it's minimal in terms of the work that you have to do. But the questionnaires go out to the different rater groups, and then you can compare and contrast how a leader sees themselves with how others see them in terms of how they operate. EQ wise. So that's very, very powerful, and we love using EQ 360. And if you want to use it, EQ 360, the cost to you is $295.
So you mentioned earlier that you know, it's just a tool, but how's your tool different from, say, Learning in Action's tool?
Yeah, Learning in Action is a completely different approach. In that one, they show you videos and ask you questions about the videos, so it's just a very different approach.
Okay.
And I think, you know, one of the reasons that people ultimately end up at the EQI from they choose other tools first because they read about it or heard about it at a conference or whatever, is because of all the research that's been done, and because of the scientific validity and the credibility that the EQI has, because these big organizations with almost unlimited resources have chosen it. So I think people ultimately get to the EQI even if they start with other things. And there are pluses and pros to using other tools as well. They're less expensive, possibly. I know that many other tools are less expensive than the EQI. So if cost is a factor, then you might go with something else.
And another question, sorry, I've got to jump too, but I wanted to get my question. So the 360 assessment, if I'm a coach and I wanted to use that with a client, must I be certified to use the 360?
Yeah, these are level B tools. So you have to take the certification course. It used to be that you could use your academic credentials, but the publishers, as many have gone, they've gone to where you have to take the certification course. And what we like about that is that people really learn all of the nuances and all of the ins and outs and all the subtleties of the tool before they go out and use it with their clients. So we like that.
What's the cost of the certification course?
The certification course is in US dollars. It is $1,066. It's never been lower because of the publishers offering COVID discounts. We're offering COVID discounts. So yeah, it's low. And then we have an additional course called Developing EQ, which we consider to be part of the certification program. So that together with the actual certification course is $1,420 USD. So $1,420 USD. And
so is that on top of the 1,000 or that?
It is, yeah. So the publisher has their course, which is the technical certification portion. And then and we don't really have enough time for most people to get into how do you develop these various areas? How do you work with your coaching clients? Or if you were to do a workshop, what would you present? And so we have this additional day called Developing EQ, which is all about developing the aspects measured by the EQI.
And that's 1,400.
That's 354. So yeah, so you're looking at a total of 1,420.
And you said it was 4 days?
4 half days for the certification, and then an additional 2 half days, and it always immediately follows. So we do Monday to Thursday, and then the following week it's Monday, Tuesday are the 2 half days for the subsequent course. And people usually take the whole thing, and it's really nice because it's very interactive, as you know, on Zoom. We use the breakout rooms, lots of exercises. People get to know each other really well, so it's a lot of fun.
Thank you.
I have a question about the 360.
Yes.
I've used a variety of different 360 tools, and I've also, read some books around how notoriously bad human beings are at rating other people. It really says more about the person doing the rating than the person being rated. So I'm curious how your 360 tool addresses that. The 360 that I've used that I have the most comfort with in terms of how it's received is based in positive psychology.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We do a lot of work on in the course, and certainly when we work with directly with our corporate clients on the upfront messaging around that. So we really want to make sure that everybody is on board with the spirit of the assessment, that it is for improving the leadership of an individual and not for any other purpose. So we try to encourage that as much as possible, but occasionally you get the occasional person who takes it as an opportunity to, get some personal jab in at someone else, and that is possible. There are open-ended questions, and sometimes people take those open-ended questions as an opportunity to, but it's rare, and really far more positive comes out of those initiatives when they're done well than negative. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else I can tell you?
Well, I'm wondering if we had 6 people from our chapter that were interested, would you be open to negotiating price?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I would. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've got to jump to another call, but I appreciate your time.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions at all? Thanks, Gail. Any other questions?
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, David. It's very enlightening and informative, and just a refresher for me, and I think for some of the other coaches here as well. Thank you again.
Great. You are welcome, Melna. And when, COVID restrictions lift, maybe you'll invite me down to teach everyone how to sing in 3-part harmony, which is what I did at the last ICF Toronto meeting last fall before the COVID restrictions.
Oh, that would be great. I want to ask everyone, once again, in the chat box, tell me what your commitment or what action or what learning you're taking away from this today. Just take about a minute and add it to the chat box.
Would it be terribly rude if I jumped off and jumped into my next meeting?
Thank you. No, we appreciate you.
Thanks so much, everyone. If you want to reach out, feel free to do so. I'm easy to find.
Thank you, David.
Bye for now. Bye.
Okay, so we've had an opportunity to add to the chat box. Love the model. Me too. Yeah, and he is supposed to be making his slides available to us, and we have the recording as well, which we'll get it together soon and get it posted. But the slides I will send out to everyone who was a participant today in the Lunch and Learn, so you'll get a copy of those. I didn't check the calendar, but we do still have upcoming events. This is the end of May, but we'll be moving quickly into June. Of course, everything will continue to be online, Zooming until further notice. So our general meeting in June, as well as our core competency call and our next Lunch and Learn will all be virtual events. We thank everyone for coming. Did anyone have anything else that they wanted to add or any questions at all? Enjoy the rest of the week. Stay out of the heat because it's hot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.